We have to face the fact that violence isn't some aberration in human nature. It's wired into our neurology at the deepest level. The killer ape, the predator who learned to organize coordinated hunting, that's where consciousness itself comes from. We're not transcending that. We're expressing it through increasingly sophisticated technologies. And if we don't understand that psilocybin-fueled leap that made us self-aware hunters, we're going to keep playing out these territorial dramas until we weaponize our way into extinction.
You see, that's precisely where we get into trouble, this idea that we must do something about our nature, that we're in a desperate race against our own demons. The Chinese have a better way of looking at it. The more you fight the shadow, the more solid it becomes. What if violence persists not because it's in our genes, but because we're resisting it, treating it as the enemy, which only gives it energy?
Alan, with respect, that's a luxury position. You can sit in the garden talking about non-resistance when you're not worried about cluster munitions and drone strikes. The recursion is real. We're caught in a fractal loop where each technological iteration of warfare creates the conditions for the next level of violence. This isn't about resisting our shadow. It's about recognizing that consciousness itself may be a mistake evolution made, or at least a catastrophic misdirection.
Now there's the error. You're assuming consciousness is separate from nature, that it's somehow gone rogue. But what if consciousness committing violence is nature committing violence through us? The universe isn't trying to fix itself, it's just being what it is. Your desperation to prevent catastrophe is itself part of the pattern. It's like the left hand fighting the right hand.
But that's quietism dressed up in paradox. Yes, we are nature expressing itself, but we're also the only part of nature that can choose differently. We have the capacity for novelty, for morphogenesis, the ability to actually break the pattern. The shamanic traditions understood this. That's why they used entheogens to create discontinuity in consciousness, to access states outside the habitual loops. Surrender to the pattern is just surrender.
You're still caught in the myth of the willful ego making a choice outside the system. The shaman doesn't get enlightened by defeating his demons. He gets enlightened by realizing they were never separate from him in the first place. The psilocybin isn't showing you a new pattern to follow. It's dissolving the distinction between the observer and the observed, between the violence and the one who's horrified by violence.
Okay, but that dissolution you're describing, I'd argue it only happens after you've seen the machine clearly. And the machine right now is designed for extraction and dominance. Look at history as a kind of novelty curve accelerating toward a singularity. We went from spears to nuclear weapons in microseconds of evolutionary time. The dissolution you're talking about sounds beautiful. But if we don't also have a practical politics, a way to actually alter the trajectory, we're just meditating on the deck of the Titanic.
But the tragedy is that practically altering the trajectory is precisely what prevents the transformation you're after. Every war fought to end war, every revolution to create a perfect society. They all produce more of the same because they're operating from the assumption that there's a separate self trying to control the world. The archaic wisdom isn't a retreat. It's the most sophisticated technology humanity has ever developed, though we've completely forgotten how to use it.
I'm not saying we should abandon contemplative practice. I'm saying they're not enough. The Buddhists have been practicing Wu Wei for 25 centuries, and we still have nuclear weapons in submarines. Maybe the archaic revival needs to include the archaic rejection of suffering, the shamanic willingness to say no to what doesn't serve. That's not ego, that's informed refusal. You can't transcend what you won't look at.
And you can't escape what you're desperately trying to escape from. I'll grant you the paradox, though. The most effective activism I've ever seen comes from people who've somehow combined the enlightened acceptance with purposeful action, not despite the acceptance, but through it. They're not trying to win, they're not trying to prove something about themselves. They're simply aligning with what needs to be done without the neurotic charge.
Now that's interesting. You're describing something like a dharmic engagement, but not the passive kind. And maybe that's what the psychedelic experience could catalyze, not escape into mysticism, but a kind of informed engagement where you've seen the machinery of violence clearly enough that you can operate outside of it, not trying to destroy war, but creating the cognitive capacity for genuine alternatives.
Yes, except I'd flip it slightly. You can't create alternatives while you're still in the stance of war against the alternative. The moment you truly stop fighting your own nature, you become capable of the kind of flexible response the Taoists called action through non-action. violence will persist in this world because it's part of the cosmic dance. But humans don't have to be marionettes pulled by their reptile brains. That takes the dissolution you were skeptical of.
I hear you. Maybe what we're both saying is that the dissolution and the clear-eyed engagement have to happen together. The stoned ape on psilocybin suddenly sees the fractal nature of conflict, how every act of violence is a microcosm of the larger pattern. That vision could either paralyze you with despair or mobilize you toward creating the conditions for different recursions. It depends on whether you've actually integrated the experience or just had a nice trip.
And integration, I suspect, is the really difficult work, which is why most people with access to profound experiences either become prophets trying to change the world or gurus trying to escape it. The actual thing, the thing nobody wants to do, is to live as if nothing has happened, to walk among the bombs and the bullshit with complete ordinariness and the radical acceptance of tragedy. That's the archaic future, if we have one.